In the beginning, God created, and He did a good job. This world got off to a perfect start. He created us, gave us free will, said, here's this world, it's perfect, enjoy it. Here's some advice. Do some of this, don't do some of that. Things are going to work out pretty well. And forever long we took that advice until the day we decided to do our own thing. In Adam and Eve's case, they decided to do their own thing and take some of that fruit that God said, hey, this isn't a good idea, the world doesn't work well if you try this. They did. And when they did their own thing, they brought into their lives and into the life of this world suffering, pain, and a host of other problems. And this world started to fall apart. Adam and Eve themselves, they became perfect people who were starting to fall apart. The world itself started to fall apart. God's perfect creation was no longer perfect. And the story from that day was just a question of how far are we going to fall? How much is this going to fall apart? Well, as we realized, hey, our life is falling apart. We've got suffering and pain. One of the first things we try to do is learn how to hide it. So we started managing our image, learning how to put forth the impression we had it all put together. For Adam and Eve in the garden, it was covering themselves with leaves and claiming that, hey, nothing's wrong here, nothing to see. Putting forth this image that said everything was okay. We still do the same thing today as our lives fall apart. And as we experience suffering and pain, we try to hide behind a shell and project an image that someone has got everything put together. But as a consequence of this, of managing our image, of putting forth this facade, we end up lonely. People don't really get to know us. We don't really get to know them. And even though people love us, we feel like they love the image we're projecting, not really us with all our flaws and faults. When we project this image, we also end up with a broken relationship with God because we don't really give Him a chance to shower us with grace and love the way He desires. And so the world falls apart. Creation falls apart. And in our lives, this story has been repeated, getting off to a pretty good start. And as we did our own thing, we brought suffering and pain into our life. As we tried to hide that fact and project an image of having everything put together, we ended up lonelier and lonelier with more of a broken relationship with God. And it ends up in a mess. And the only question becomes, how much is everything going to fall apart? And at this point, God, who created this perfect world and gave it to us as a gift, has a chance to say, listen, I gave you a perfect creation. Everything was just the way it should be. You've messed it up. And now you're on your own to figure out how to put it back together. But instead, our God, our holy God, He came in the form of Jesus Christ and came to redeem this world and begin to put it back together. He came at the cross and died in our place, taking on Himself the loneliness, suffering, and pain, the broken relationship with God that should have been ours, taking that on Himself, burying that, leaving it behind forever, and rising again. And in rising again, beginning the process of putting this world back together until the day that He finishes the job. And so here we are now, living in a world that is being put back together. Rather than being a part of a world that was falling apart, we're now part of a world that has fallen apart and is being put back together until someday God finishes the job. This is good news. And what we start to find is that the challenge for us is to begin to walk away from doing our own thing, which gets in the way of God putting our lives back together. You see, He's got a way of healing things up. And when God wants to heal our relationships up and we refuse to forgive, we do our own thing, we bring suffering and pain into our life, and we make it harder for Him to put it back together. So what we begin to find out as followers of Jesus, as people who believe this right here, what we call the gospel. The good news that because of what Jesus did on the cross, this is over. And no longer do we live in a perfect world that's falling apart. No longer do we live a life that started off okay but is falling apart. Instead, we live in a life of someone who's fallen apart and is being put back together until one day when God, an all-powerful, all-loving God, finishes the job, and we know He's going to finish the job. This is the good news. And so what we as Christians begin to find is that we start walking away from doing our own thing and wear out the path from doing our own thing to the cross, where we come to God and say, listen, Lord, I want to do this your way. I want you to put my life back together, and I want to make that as easy as possible. I'm tired of doing my own thing and the suffering and pain that comes with it. I'm going to trust you and let you put my life back together. Rather than continuing to bandage our image and put forth this idea that we've got it all put together, we don't need help, we don't need God, we've got it taken care of, we start wearing out this path. From managing our image to coming to the cross and saying, Lord, this is who I am. This is who I really am. I want you to put me back together, the real me, the broken me, the me with flaws and faults. And I don't care who sees my flaws and faults, because the good news is Jesus is putting me back together, and we start to wear this path out. And as we wear out these paths to stay close to the cross, Jesus puts us back together, and our hope increases. The confidence that we have in Him, that one day this job of putting us back together that He hasn't completed yet, that He's going to finish it. And I invite you today, to believe that the one who has started this work in you, the one who started you off perfect, the one who stayed close to you as you fell apart, the one who's died in your place, who's suffered with you, who's been in pain with you, who's been lonely with you, who's suffered distance in his relationship with God with you, who's done all this for you, that you will put your trust in him rather than continuing to live your life doing your own thing, rather than continue to live your life putting forth the image that you've got it all put back together, and instead come to Jesus and let him start the process of healing your life, of putting you back together. Because if I know one thing, it's that he's going to get that job done. So let's get on board. Let's let him finish today rather than tomorrow. And if not today, maybe he'll finish tomorrow rather than the day after. And we get to be a part of this right here. Not only seeing us put back together, but getting to be a part of him putting this world back together. This right here is what we live for. Good news, guys. This world's headed up. Your life is headed up. He's putting us back together. He's going to finish the job.